The blizzard hit Pecos, Texas on the third week of January 1884, bringing with it a silence so complete that Thomas Brennan could hear the scratch of his own pen against paper from across the general store where he worked. He stood behind the counter, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air, watching the snow pile against the front window in drifts that reached halfway up the glass. The store was empty except for old Mr. Henderson, who ran the place, and even he had retreated to the back room, where a small stove fought a losing battle against the cold. Thomas was supposed to be taking inventory, but instead he found himself staring at the snow, wondering if the mail wagon would make it through. It did, barely. The driver stumbled through the door just past noon, his beard thick with ice, his hands so stiff he could barely hold the leather satchel he carried. "One letter," he gasped, dropping the bag on the counter. "Only one damn letter made it worth the trip. Hope somebody in this frozen hellhole is waiting for it." Thomas took the bag and watched the driver disappear back into the white wall of snow, heading for the saloon across the street, where he would spend the next 2 days drinking until the storm passed. Inside the satchel, nestled among empty mail slots, was a single envelope. Thomas pulled it out and turned it over in his hands. The paper was fine quality, better than most folks in Pecos could afford, and the handwriting was elegant, flowing script that spoke of education and refinement. The address read simply, Thomas Brennan, Pecos, Texas, his own name. Thomas stared at it for a long moment, his heart beginning to pound in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He did not recognize the return address, which listed only Zara Osgood, San Antonio, Texas. The name meant nothing to him, yet someone had written to him, had paid for postage during the worst winter storm in recent memory, had ensured this letter found its way across 200 miles of frozen prairie. He broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the pages inside. There were 3 of them, covered front and back in that same elegant script. He began to read. "Dear Mr. Brennan," the letter began. "You do not know me, but I know of you through my late brother, Samuel Osgood, who served with you in the cavalry 5 years ago. Samuel spoke of you often in his letters home, describing your kindness and your honor, your steady hand in difficult situations, and your dream of building a life on your own land once your service ended. He considered you his truest friend during those hard years, and when he died of fever in the summer of 1881, his last words included a request that I write to you someday. Should I ever find myself in need of the kind of help only a good man could provide." Thomas sat down hard on the stool behind the counter, the letter shaking in his hands. Samuel Osgood. He remembered the name, remembered the young soldier who had indeed been his closest companion during 3 years of hard riding and harder fighting. Samuel had been quick to laugh, slow to anger, and possessed of an optimism that seemed out of place in their brutal circumstances. Thomas had held him during those final fevered hours, had promised to write to his family, and then had failed to do so because he had not known what words could possibly suffice. The letter continued. "I find myself now in circumstances that I can only describe as desperate. My father passed away 2 years ago, leaving my mother and myself in what we believed to be comfortable circumstances. However, we have recently discovered that my father's business partner, a man named Horace Whitmore, has been systematically defrauding us of our inheritance. My father owned a ranch outside San Antonio, along with considerable property in the town itself. Whitmore has produced documents that he claims prove my father owed him substantial debts that can only be satisfied by transferring ownership of everything to him. I have consulted with every lawyer in San Antonio, and each has told me that Whitmore's documents appear legitimate, though I know in my heart they are forgeries. Whitmore is a powerful man with connections throughout the territory. He has made it clear that if I continue to fight him, he will see to it that my mother and I are left with nothing, not even our reputation. He has proposed an alternative arrangement, one that involves my becoming his wife. I would rather die than submit to such a fate. My mother's health is fragile, and the stress of our situation has left her bedridden. We have perhaps 2 months before Whitmore's legal machinations are complete and we are forced from our home. I am writing to you, Mr. Brennan, because I have no one else to turn to. Samuel believed you to be a man of honor and capability. I am asking if you would be willing to travel to San Antonio and help me find proof of Whitmore's deception. I can offer no payment except my gratitude and the knowledge that you would be helping the family of your fallen friend. I understand this is an enormous request to make of a stranger. If you choose not to respond, I will understand and hold no ill will. But if there is any chance you might help, please come quickly. Time is running short, and I fear what Whitmore might do if he believes I have sought outside assistance. The letter was signed Zara Osgood, and below her signature she had added a postscript. Samuel told me that you once said you would ride through hell itself for a friend. I pray that promise extends to a friend's sister. Thomas read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, piling snow against buildings, freezing everything it touched. Inside, something had shifted in his chest, a sense of purpose he had not felt since leaving the cavalry. Samuel Osgood had been his friend, had saved his life during an Apache raid when Thomas had taken an arrow to the shoulder and fallen from his horse. Samuel had dismounted in the middle of the firefight, had hauled Thomas onto his own horse and ridden them both to safety while bullets whipped past their heads. And Thomas had let his friend die without ever thanking his family, without ever acknowledging the debt he owed. More than that, though, was the letter itself. The desperation between the lines, the careful control of someone trying not to sound as frightened as they truly were. A woman alone, trying to protect her dying mother from a man who clearly had the power to destroy them both. Thomas had spent the last 3 years working in Henderson's general store, saving every penny, planning for the day when he could buy his own land and build the life he had dreamed of. He had nearly enough saved now. Another year, maybe 2, and he could make that dream real. But what kind of man would he be if he ignored this plea? What kind of man would let his friend's sister face her troubles alone because it was inconvenient to help? He stood up and walked to the back room where Mr. Henderson was dozing in a chair near the stove. "Sir," Thomas said, "I need to give my notice." Henderson opened one eye. "You picking a fine time to quit, boy, middle of a blizzard and all." "I will work until the storm clears and you can find a replacement," Thomas said. "But then I need to go to San Antonio. It is important." San Antonio. Henderson sat up, suddenly more alert. "That is a long ride in good weather. In this cold it could kill you, I know, but I have to go anyway." Henderson studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Must be some powerful reason. I will not ask what it is, but I will tell you this. You have been a good worker, Thomas. Reliable. Honest. If this thing you are riding toward does not work out, you have a job waiting for you here when you get back. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." The blizzard lasted 3 days. During that time, Thomas read Zara's letter over and over until he had memorized every word, every turn of phrase. He found himself imagining what she must look like, this woman who wrote with such careful dignity even while asking for help. He pictured someone small and fragile, refined and delicate, the kind of lady who would faint at harsh language. Samuel had been fair-haired and slight, with a quick smile and gentle manner. Surely his sister would be similar. When the storm finally broke, Thomas collected his wages, packed his few belongings into his saddlebags, and prepared his horse for the journey. He had a good gelding, a sturdy bay named Copper who had carried him reliably for the past 2 years. The horse was well rested and well fed, better prepared for the journey than Thomas himself, perhaps. He left Pecos on a morning so cold that the sun seemed to give no warmth at all, just harsh white light reflecting off endless snow. The road south was barely visible, marked only by fence posts and the occasional landmark. Thomas rode carefully, letting Copper pick his way through the drifts, stopping frequently to rest in whatever sheltered spots he could find. At night, he made small camps, building fires just large enough to keep from freezing, rationing his supplies because he had no idea how long the journey would take in these conditions. Under normal circumstances, the ride from Pecos to San Antonio took about 2 weeks. In the aftermath of the blizzard, with snow still covering everything and temperatures that rarely rose above freezing even at midday, Thomas figured it would take closer to 3. He pushed as hard as he dared, but not so hard that he would kill his horse or himself in the process. A man had to be smart about these things. He had plenty of time to think during those long, cold days in the saddle. He thought about Samuel, remembering their time together in the cavalry. They had been assigned to escort wagon trains, protect settlements from raids, and occasionally chase down outlaws who had fled into the territories. It had been dangerous work, often brutal, but Samuel had made it bearable with his humor and his unwavering belief that things would get better. Thomas thought about the letter, about the woman who had written it. He tried to imagine what kind of courage it must have taken to reach out to a stranger, to admit her desperate circumstances to someone she had never met. He wondered if she was as educated and refined as her handwriting suggested, or if perhaps she had simply been taught to write well. He wondered if she was pretty, then felt ashamed of himself for wondering such a thing when the woman was facing the loss of everything she had. Mostly, though, he thought about what he was going to do when he reached San Antonio. He was a cowboy and a former cavalry soldier, not a lawyer or a detective. He knew how to track game and read signs, how to handle a horse and a gun, how to survive in rough country. But uncovering fraud and fighting a powerful man with legal documents, that was territory he had never explored. He would have to figure it out as he went, rely on his instincts and his experience with difficult situations. It was not much of a plan, but it was all he had. The journey took 19 days. Thomas reached the outskirts of San Antonio on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-February, with the worst of the cold finally beginning to break. The city was larger than he had expected, bustling with activity even in winter. He stopped at a boarding house near the center of town, paid for a room and a hot bath, and asked the proprietor where he might find the Osgood ranch. Osgood Place is about 5 miles west of town, the man said, but you will not find the Osgoods there much longer if the gossip is true. Heard they are about to lose everything to Horace Whitmore. Shame, really. Old Mr. Osgood was a good man, and his daughter has been trying to hold things together since he passed. What kind of man is Whitmore? Thomas asked carefully. The proprietor's expression darkened. The kind who gets what he wants, one way or another. Rich, connected, not particular about how he conducts his business. I would not want to cross him if I could help it. Thomas thanked him for the information and went up to his room. He scrubbed away weeks of trail dirt, shaved the thick beard he had grown against the cold, and put on his cleanest shirt. Then he sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pulled out Zara's letter one more time. He had sent no reply, had no way of knowing if she would even see him when he arrived. For all he knew, she had found another solution to her problems, or Whitmore had already succeeded in taking everything. But he had come this far. He would see it through. He rode out to the ranch the next morning, following the directions the boarding house proprietor had given him. The land here was different from the high plains around Pecos, more rolling hills and scattered trees, with creeks that still ran despite the cold. The Osgood ranch, when he reached it, was more impressive than he had anticipated. The main house was a solid two-story structure built of local stone, with a wide porch and real glass windows. The barns and outbuildings were well maintained, and even in winter he could see that the property had once been prosperous. Now, though, there was an air of neglect about the place. Fences needed mending, the barn doors hung crooked on their hinges, and no smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. Thomas tied copper to the hitching post outside the main house and climbed the steps to the front door. He knocked and waited, his heart beating harder than it had any right to. The woman who opened the door was not what he had expected. She was tall, nearly as tall as Thomas himself, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore a plain work dress with an apron over it, and her hands showed calluses from physical labor. She looked tired, worn down by worry and work, but there was strength in the set of her shoulders and intelligence in her gaze. She was, Thomas realized with a jolt that ran straight through his chest, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with delicacy or refinement and everything to do with determination and fire. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice wary. "I am looking for Miss Zara Osgood," Thomas said, suddenly feeling awkward and tongue-tied, her eyes widened. "I am Zara Osgood. Who are you?" "Thomas Brennan," he said. "From Pecos. You wrote me a letter." For a moment she just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then her hand came up to cover her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears. "You came," she whispered. "I did not think you would actually come. I posted that letter during the blizzard, and when I heard how bad the storm was, I thought surely it would not reach you, and even if it did, why would you risk such a journey for a stranger?" "Your brother saved my life," Thomas said simply. "I owed him more than I could ever repay. If helping you can settle even a small part of that debt, then it is worth any journey." She opened the door wider. "Please come in. You must be frozen and exhausted. Let me get you something hot to drink and I will tell you everything." Inside, the house was cold but clean. Zara led him to a small sitting room where a fire burned in the hearth, and she gestured for him to sit while she disappeared into the kitchen. Thomas looked around, noting the quality of the furniture, the paintings on the walls, the books in the shelves. This had been a home of wealth and culture, the kind of place where a young woman would learn elegant handwriting and proper manners. Zara returned with 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from him. Up close, he could see the shadows under her eyes, the strain around her mouth. She was younger than he had thought, probably no more than 22 or 23, but she carried herself with the gravity of someone much older. "I do not know where to begin," she said, wrapping her hands around her cup as if to draw warmth from it. "Start with your father," Thomas suggested. "Tell me about his business with Whitmore." She nodded and took a breath. "My father, Gerald Osgood, made his fortune in cattle and land. He was careful with money, always planned ahead, never took unnecessary risks. 5 years ago, he entered into a partnership with Horace Whitmore to purchase a large tract of land east of here. The idea was to develop it gradually, selling parcels to settlers as the town expanded. It seemed like a sound investment. When did things go wrong? My father became ill 2.5 years ago. At first it seemed like nothing serious, just fatigue and some pain. But over the following months, he grew steadily weaker. The doctors could not tell us what was wrong, only that his organs were failing one by one. He died 6 months later in the spring of 1883. My mother was devastated. They had been married for 30 years. Thomas heard the pain in her voice and waited quietly for her to continue. After the funeral, Whitmore came to see us. He was very kind at first, offering condolences and assistance. He said my father's affairs would need to be settled, and he offered to help us understand the business matters. That was when he produced the documents. They showed that my father had borrowed heavily from him over the past 2 years, using the ranch and our other properties as collateral. According to Whitmore, my father owed him nearly $50,000. Thomas let out a low whistle. That was an enormous sum, more money than most men would see in a lifetime. My mother and I were shocked, Zara continued. My father had always told us our finances were solid. He never mentioned any debts, never gave any indication we were in trouble. But Whitmore had papers with my father's signature, documents that appeared to be legitimate. He said he had been patient because of my father's illness, but now that my father was gone, he needed to collect what was owed. You do not believe the documents are real. I know they are not real, she said fiercely. My father would never have put our home at risk. He was too careful, too protective of us, and the timing makes no sense. According to Whitmore's papers, my father borrowed the first sum just a few months after he became ill. Why would a dying man take on massive debts he knew he could never repay? Thomas leaned forward. What exactly does Whitmore want? Everything. The ranch, the town properties, even my mother's jewelry. He has given us until the end of February to vacate the premises. That is 9 days from now. Her voice shook slightly. I have spent the last year fighting him, but he has judges and lawyers in his pocket. Every appeal I file is denied. Every expert I consult tells me the documents look legitimate. I am running out of options. You mentioned in your letter that Whitmore proposed marriage. Zara's expression turned cold. 3 months ago, he came to me with an offer. If I would agree to marry him, he would forgive the debts and allow my mother to remain in the house. He said he had always admired me, that he would take good care of us. When I refused, he became angry. He told me I was being foolish, that I would end up with nothing if I continued to fight him. He said no one else would help me, that I had no choice but to accept his generosity. Thomas felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. He had known men like Whitmore before, men who used their power to take what they wanted, who saw other people as obstacles to be overcome or tools to be used. There is always a choice, he said quietly. She met his eyes and something passed between them, a recognition of shared stubborn pride. That is what Samuel used to say, he would have liked you. I liked him. He was a good man and a good friend. I should have written to you after he died. I am sorry I did not. He died far from home, among people who cared about him, Zara said. That is more than many soldiers get. I always hoped his friend Thomas was one of the good ones, that Samuel had not misplaced his trust. Now I know he did not. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling softly. Then Thomas said, I need to understand Whitmore's scheme. The documents he has produced, where were they supposedly signed? Some at his office in San Antonio, some at the ranch here. There are promissory notes, loan agreements, transfer documents, all signed by my father, all witnessed by Whitmore's associates. And your father never mentioned any of this to you or your mother. Never. He discussed business with my mother regularly. They had that kind of marriage, a partnership. If he had been in financial trouble, he would have told her. I am certain of it. Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch yard. His mind was working through the problem, looking for angles and weaknesses. If the documents are forgeries, then someone forged your father's signature. That means either Whitmore did it himself, or he hired someone skilled enough to fool experts. Either way, there might be small differences between the forged signatures and your father's real signature. Do you have any documents you know your father actually signed? Yes, in his study. Business correspondence, his will, various legal papers from before he became ill. I can show you. Good. I will need to examine those. I will also need to find out more about Whitmore himself. Who his associates are, how he conducts his business, whether anyone else has been cheated the way you have been. Men like him usually have a pattern. Hope flickered across Zara's face. You think you can find proof? I think I can try. But you need to understand something, Miss Osgood. If Whitmore is as powerful as you say, proving he is a fraud might not be enough. We might need leverage, something that makes it dangerous for him to come after you. Are you prepared for what that might mean? She stood and walked toward him, her spine straight, her chin lifted. Mr. Brennan, I have spent the last year watching my mother waste away from grief and stress, while a monster tries to steal everything my father built. I am prepared to do whatever it takes to protect her and preserve my father's legacy. I am not some fragile society lady who needs protecting from harsh realities. I am a rancher's daughter who knows how to work and how to fight. So yes, I am prepared. Thomas found himself smiling despite the seriousness of the situation. I believe you are. In that case, let us get started. Show me your father's study, and tell me everything you know about Horace Whitmore's business dealings. They spent the rest of that day, and most of the next going through Gerald Osgood's papers. Thomas examined signature after signature, noting the way Zara's father had formed his letters, the pressure of his pen, the small quirks that made each person's handwriting unique. He also read through business correspondence, getting a sense of how Gerald had conducted his affairs. The picture that emerged was of a careful, methodical man who documented everything and kept meticulous records. Your father was thorough, Thomas observed, making notes in a small book he had brought with him. Every transaction recorded, every agreement documented. It seems unlikely he would suddenly start borrowing large sums without keeping any records of his own. That is what I have been saying, Zara said. But no one will listen. Whitmore's lawyers argue that my father was confused toward the end, that his illness affected his judgment. They say it is not unusual for a dying man to make desperate financial decisions. Except your father did not know he was dying until very near the end. You said the doctors could not diagnose his illness. That is right. They kept saying it was probably nothing serious, that he just needed rest. It was not until the last few months that they admitted he was not going to recover. Thomas sat back, tapping his pencil against the desk. So according to Whitmore's timeline, your father began borrowing money just as he was starting to feel sick, before anyone knew it was serious. Why would he do that? He would not. That is my point. Unless he was being poisoned. The words hung in the air between them. Zara's face went pale. What? Think about it, Thomas said, his mind racing. A healthy man suddenly becomes ill with symptoms the doctors cannot explain. His organs fail gradually over the course of months. Meanwhile, his business partner suddenly has documents showing large debts. What if Whitmore was poisoning your father slowly, making him sick and weak, and using that confusion and weakness to force him to sign documents? Or to forge his signature while your father was too ill to notice or protest? That would be murder, Zara whispered. Yes, it would. And it would explain why your father never told you about the debts, because he never knew they existed. Thomas stood and began pacing. The question is how to prove it. Your father is dead, so we cannot examine him for traces of poison. But if Whitmore did this to your father, he might have done it to others. We need to find out if anyone else has been cheated by him under similar circumstances." Zara was still processing the implications. "If you are right, if he killed my father, then he is far more dangerous than I thought. Mr. Brennan, I cannot ask you to risk your life for this." "You are not asking. I am choosing. And my name is Thomas." "I think we are past formalities at this point, Miss Osgood." She managed a small smile. "Then you should call me Zara. Miss Osgood sounds like a stranger." "Zara," he said, and liked the way her name felt in his mouth. "I am going into town tomorrow to ask some questions. I need you to stay here with your mother and act as if nothing has changed. If Whitmore suspects you have brought in help, he might accelerate his timeline or take other action. I could come with you, help you ask questions." "You could, but people will be more willing to talk to me if you are not there. Whitmore has been threatening you for months. Anyone seen talking to you might face retaliation. A stranger asking casual questions about business matters will draw less attention." She nodded reluctantly. "I suppose that makes sense, but please be careful. Whitmore has men who work for him, rough types who are not afraid to use violence." "I spent 3 years in the cavalry dealing with rough types," Thomas said. "I can handle myself, but I appreciate the concern." She looked at him for a long moment, her gray eyes searching his face. "Why are you really doing this, Thomas? I know you say you owed Samuel, but surely that debt does not require you to risk so much." He thought about how to answer, about all the reasons that had brought him here. The debt to Samuel was real, but there was more to it than that. There was the injustice of the situation, the wrongness of a powerful man crushing someone weaker. There was the memory of all the times during the war when he had been powerless to help, forced to follow orders and watch bad things happen to good people. And there was Zara herself, this strong, stubborn woman who refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. "Samuel once told me that the measure of a man is not what he does when people are watching, but what he does when he could walk away and no one would blame him," Thomas said finally. "I could have ignored your letter. No one in Pecos would have known or cared, but I would have known. And I would have been less than the man I want to be." Zara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "My brother chose his friends well." Thomas spent the next week in San Antonio, visiting saloons and businesses, talking to clerks and merchants and anyone else who might know something about Horace Whitmore. He presented himself as a potential investor interested in the town's business prospects, asking casual questions about who the major players were and what kind of deals they made. The picture that emerged was troubling. Whitmore was indeed powerful, with connections to the territorial government and investments in half the businesses in town. He was also ruthless, known for acquiring properties at suspiciously favorable terms and for having a knack for buying land just before it became valuable. 3 men Thomas talked to mentioned other families who had fallen on sudden hard times and been forced to sell to Whitmore, though none of them had details about the circumstances. On the 5th day, Thomas found what he was looking for. An old clerk at the county recorder's office, a man with a whiskey-reddened nose and shaky hands, remembered something about another case similar to the Osgoods. "Fellow named Martinez," the clerk said, lowering his voice and glancing around nervously. "Owned a big property north of town, good water rights and prime grazing land. About 3 years ago, he took sick and died sudden-like. Whitmore came in a week later with papers showing Martinez owed him money. Family had to sell everything to cover the debt. You remember Martinez's family. Where they went. Widow took her kids and moved to Austin, I think. Or maybe it was Dallas. She was pretty bitter about the whole thing, said it did not make sense that her husband would have borrowed so much without telling her. "Did anyone investigate?" The clerk laughed, a bitter sound. "Investigate Horace Whitmore. Son, you must be new around here. Whitmore owns half the law in this town. Nobody investigates him." Thomas thanked the clerk and slipped him money for his trouble. He spent the next 2 days tracking down information about the Martinez family and found 2 other similar cases, both involving older men who had died suddenly after brief illnesses, leaving behind widows and forged-looking debt documents that gave Whitmore control of valuable properties. The pattern was clear. What Thomas needed now was proof that would hold up against Whitmore's lawyers and political connections. He needed to examine the forged documents themselves, compare them to genuine signatures, maybe even find the forger Whitmore had used. And he needed to do it all in the next 2 days before the deadline Whitmore had imposed ran out. He returned to the ranch on the 8th day, his mind churning with plans. Zara met him at the door, her expression tense. "Whitmore was here yesterday," she said without preamble. "He came to remind me that we have only 2 days left. He also asked if I had changed my mind about his offer. When I said no, he told me that I was making a mistake, that things would go badly for us if we tried to fight him." "Did he threaten you directly?" "Not in so many words." But the implication was clear. She paused. "He also mentioned that he had heard a stranger was in town asking questions about him. He warned me that seeking outside help would only make things worse." So Whitmore knew about him. That complicated matters but did not change the essential situation. Thomas told Zara about what he had learned, about the pattern of sudden illnesses and convenient debts. Her face hardened as she listened. "He killed them. He killed all those men, including my father." "I believe so, but believing and proving are different things. We need evidence that will stand up in court, or better yet, evidence that will make Whitmore afraid to continue his scheme." "What kind of evidence?" Thomas pulled out the notes he had been making. "First, we need to examine the documents Whitmore claims your father signed. I need to see them directly, compare the signatures in detail. Second, we need to find the forger. Someone created those documents, and if we can get them to testify, we have our proof. Third, we need to find out how Whitmore poisoned your father. If we can connect him to the purchase of poison, or to someone with access to your father during his illness, that is more evidence. That is a lot to accomplish in 2 days. Yes, it is, which is why we need to move quickly and take some risks." He looked at her steadily. "How good are you at breaking and entering?" She blinked. "Excuse me." "Whitmore's office. That is where he would keep the forged documents along with any other evidence of his schemes. We need to get inside and search his files." "That is illegal." "So is fraud and murder." "I am not saying we should do it lightly, but if you want to save your home and get justice for your father, we might not have a choice." Zara bit her lip, thinking. Then she nodded. "Tell me what you need me to do." They planned carefully. Whitmore's office was in a building downtown above a bank he partially owned. The building was locked at night, but Zara knew that Whitmore often worked late. Their best chance would be to break in on a night when he was not there, search quickly, and get out before anyone noticed. Thomas spent that afternoon scouting the building, noting the locations of windows and doors, the sight lines from the street, the patterns of foot traffic. That evening, he and Zara rode into town separately, timing their arrival for just after midnight when the streets would be mostly empty. The window on the second floor was locked but not barred. Thomas used his knife to work the latch free, then climbed through and helped Zara up after him. Inside, they found themselves in a hallway lined with doors. Whitmore's private office was at the end, a large room with a massive desk and filing cabinets lining the walls. "You search the desk," "I will take the files," Thomas whispered. "Look for anything with your father's name on it, or the names Martinez, Colby, or Henderson. Those are the other families I think Whitmore cheated. They worked by lamplight, moving as quickly as they dared. The files were meticulous, organized by date and property." Thomas found the Martinez file first, containing the same pattern as the Osgood case: loan documents, promissory notes, transfer deeds. He pulled out several pages and held them up to the light, studying the signatures. "Look at this," he said softly. Zara came to peer over his shoulder, and he showed her the subtle differences between the signatures on different documents. "See how the M in Martinez is formed differently here versus here. And the spacing between letters changes. These were not all signed by the same person." "Which means they were forged," Zara breathed. "Right. And look at the witness signatures. Same two men on all the documents for all four families. That is suspicious. Legitimate business dealings would have different witnesses." They kept searching and found more evidence of the pattern. Whitmore had been running this scheme for at least 5 years, targeting older men with valuable properties, poisoning them slowly, and then producing forged debt documents to claim their estates. The scope of it was breathtaking and sickening. Then Zara found something else in the desk drawer. A small leather-bound ledger hidden beneath a false bottom. She pulled it out and flipped through the pages. "Thomas, look at this." He came to stand beside her, reading over her shoulder. The ledger contained names, dates, and amounts. Gerald Osgood's name was there, along with the notation paid F. Sullivan $200 for documents, paid R. Torres $500 for delivery, property transferred March 1884. Below that were entries for the other families, each with similar notations. "F. Sullivan must be the forger," Thomas said, "and R. Torres must be whoever delivered the poison. This is it, Zara. This is the evidence we need. We need to take it. If we take it, Whitmore will know someone broke in. He will hide everything else, maybe leave town entirely. Then we copy it, quickly." They spent the next hour frantically copying entries from the ledger, working by lamplight with Zara's steady hand, transcribing the damning information. Thomas also took several of the forged documents, choosing ones that showed clear evidence of fraud. They were just finishing when they heard footsteps on the stairs. "Someone is coming," Zara hissed. Thomas grabbed the documents they had copied, shoved them into his coat, and pulled Zara toward the window. They climbed out onto the narrow ledge just as the office door opened. Through the gap in the curtains, Thomas could see Horace Whitmore himself entering the room, carrying a lamp. Whitmore was a large man in his 50s, well-dressed and prosperous-looking, with the kind of face that would seem kindly if you did not know what lay behind it. He walked to his desk, set down the lamp, and began sorting through papers, apparently looking for something. Thomas and Zara pressed themselves against the building's exterior, barely breathing. The ledge was narrow, and below them was a 20-foot drop to the alley. One wrong move, one sound, and Whitmore would discover them. For long minutes they waited, not moving while Whitmore worked at his desk. Thomas became acutely aware of Zara, pressed against him in the small space, her warmth and the faint scent of her hair, the way her breathing had synchronized with his own. Despite the danger, despite everything, he felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that this woman beside him had become important to him in ways that went far beyond helping a friend's sister. Finally, Whitmore left, taking some papers with him. They waited until his footsteps had faded down the stairs and out into the street. Then they climbed back through the window, returned everything to its place as best they could, and made their escape. They did not speak until they were well away from downtown, riding side by side through the dark streets. Then Zara let out a shaky laugh. "I cannot believe we just did that." "You were incredible," Thomas said. "Calm and quick thinking. Samuel would have been proud." She looked at him, and even in the moonlight he could see the emotion in her eyes. "Thank you. For everything you have done, for the risks you have taken. I know I have no right to ask so much of you." "You have every right," he said, "and I would do it again." They rode in silence for a while longer. Then Zara said quietly, "What happens now?" "Now we find F. Sullivan and R. Torres. If we can get one of them to testify, combined with the evidence we copied, we should have enough to bring charges against Whitmore. Even his political connections cannot save him from murder charges if we have solid proof. And if they will not testify, then we use the evidence to force Whitmore to back down, threaten to expose him unless he destroys the forged documents and leaves you alone. It is not as satisfying as seeing him face justice, but it would accomplish our primary goal of saving your home." Zara nodded slowly. "Tomorrow is the last day before his deadline. We need to move quickly." Finding F. Sullivan turned out to be easier than Thomas expected. He spent the next morning making inquiries, and by noon he had learned that Frederick Sullivan was a former clerk who had been fired from his position at a law firm for falsifying documents. He now worked occasionally as a scribe for hire, taking whatever jobs he could get. He lived in a boarding house on the poor side of town, and he had a reputation for drinking too much and talking too little. Thomas found him in a saloon that afternoon, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and haunted eyes. He sat down across from Sullivan without asking permission and said quietly, "I know you forged documents for Horace Whitmore. I have proof. I also have enough evidence to have you arrested for fraud. Your choice is simple. Testify against Whitmore or go to jail yourself." Sullivan's face went white. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Yes, you do. You forged loan documents for at least 4 families, including the Osgoods and the Martinses. Whitmore paid you $200 per set of documents. I have a ledger entry in his own handwriting proving it." The scribe's hands shook. "If I testify against him, he will kill me." "If you do not testify against him, you will hang for fraud. Whitmore is going down one way or another. Your only chance is to cooperate and maybe get a reduced sentence." Sullivan stared into his whiskey glass for a long time. Finally he said, "I did not know he was killing people. I swear I did not know. He told me he needed the documents for business deals, said the people involved had agreed but could not be present to sign in person. I thought it was just contract stuff, you know, nothing serious." "But you knew you were forging signatures." Yeah, I knew that. I needed the money. I had debts." He looked up at Thomas with desperate eyes. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to write out a confession detailing exactly what documents you forged for Whitmore and when. Then I want you to come with me to the sheriff's office and repeat that confession officially. Do that, and I will make sure the prosecutor knows you cooperated. Whitmore owns the sheriff. Then we will go to the U.S. Marshal instead. This is a territorial matter now, involves fraud and murder. The local sheriff cannot protect him." It took another hour of persuasion, but finally Sullivan agreed. He wrote out his confession in his clear scribe's hand, detailing every document he had forged, every payment he had received. Thomas read it carefully, asked clarifying questions, and made sure every detail was recorded. Finding R. Torres proved more difficult. The name was common enough that there were several possibilities in San Antonio. But the ledger had listed him as being paid for delivery, which suggested he had actually brought poison to the victims. Thomas reasoned that he was probably someone who had legitimate access to the targeted homes, someone who would not raise suspicion. He spent the afternoon checking with servants and workers who had been employed by the affected families. Finally, An old woman who had worked as a cook for the Martinez family remembered something. There was a man who delivered medicine, she said. Mr. Martinez was taking tonic for his illness. The man who brought it was named Torres, I think. Rodrigo Torres. He worked for the apothecary downtown. Thomas found the apothecary just before closing time. The owner confirmed that Rodrigo Torres had worked there but had left suddenly about 2 years ago. Just stopped showing up one day, the owner said. I heard he moved to Mexico, had family in Chihuahua or somewhere like that. That was a dead end, at least temporarily. But Sullivan's confession might be enough, especially combined with the forged documents and the ledger entries they had copied. Thomas returned to the ranch to tell Zara what he had learned. She met him at the door, her face drawn with stress. My mother has taken a turn for the worse. The doctor is with her now. He says the strain has been too much for her heart. Thomas followed her inside and up the stairs to a bedroom where an older woman lay in bed, pale and struggling for breath. The doctor, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, was packing his bag. I've given her something to help her rest, he said quietly. But Miss Osgood, I must be honest with you. Your mother's heart is failing. It could be days or it could be weeks, but I do not believe she has much longer. Zara's face crumpled. Is there nothing you can do? I am sorry. At this point, all we can do is keep her comfortable and try to minimize her distress. After the doctor left, Thomas found Zara in the hallway, leaning against the wall with tears streaming down her face. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms and she collapsed against him, sobbing. I cannot lose her, she choked out. She is all I have left. You are not going to lose her, Thomas said, holding her tightly. We are going to fix this. Tomorrow we are going to the U.S. Marshal with Sullivan's confession and all the evidence we have gathered. We are going to expose Whitmore for what he is, and your mother is going to see justice done for your father. She is going to see you safe and secure in your home. That is going to happen, Zara. I promise you. She clung to him, and he could feel her trying to pull herself together, gathering that fierce strength he had come to admire so much. Finally, she stepped back, wiping her eyes. I am sorry. I did not mean to fall apart like that. You are entitled to fall apart. You have been fighting this alone for a year, but you are not alone anymore. I am here and we are going to win this. She looked up at him, and the gratitude and trust in her eyes made his chest ache. I do not know what I would have done if you had not come. You would have found a way, he said. You are the strongest person I have ever met. I do not feel strong right now. Strength is not about never feeling weak. It is about keeping going even when you do feel weak. You have been doing that for a year. That is real strength, Zara. She reached up and touched his face, a gentle gesture that sent warmth flooding through him. You are a good man, Thomas Brennan. Samuel was right about you. He covered her hand with his own, holding it against his cheek. I am just trying to do the right thing. It is more than that. You have given me hope when I had none left. You have made me believe we might actually win. That is a precious gift. They stood like that for a long moment, close enough that Thomas could see the flecks of blue in her gray eyes, could feel the warmth of her breath. He wanted to kiss her, wanted it so badly that it took all his willpower to resist. But this was not the time. She was vulnerable, grieving, fighting for everything she had. He would not take advantage of that, no matter how much he wanted her. Instead, he stepped back, letting his hand fall away from hers. You should get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a difficult day. She nodded, but her eyes held something that looked like disappointment. Good night, Thomas. Good night, Zara. He went downstairs and spent the night in the sitting room, reviewing the evidence they had gathered, making sure everything was in order. He also wrote out a detailed account of his investigation, documenting every conversation, every piece of evidence, every conclusion he had reached. If something happened to him, he wanted to make sure there was a record that could be used to bring Whitmore to justice. In the morning, Zara came down looking tired but determined. "My mother had a peaceful night. She is resting comfortably now." "Good. Are you ready to do this?" "Yes." "Let us end this." They rode into San Antonio together, Thomas carrying all the evidence in his saddlebags. The U.S. Marshal's office was in the federal building downtown, a solid structure that represented law that was supposed to be above local corruption. Thomas hoped that was true. The marshal on duty was a stern-faced man named Clayton, who listened to their story with increasing interest. He examined Sullivan's confession, studied the forged documents, and read through Thomas's written account of his investigation. "This is serious," Clayton said finally. "If what you are alleging is true, Horace Whitmore has committed fraud and possibly murder on a significant scale." "It is true," Zara said firmly. "He killed my father and tried to steal everything he built." "I believe you, Miss Osgood, but belief and proof are different things. We need to proceed carefully. Whitmore has significant political connections. If we move against him without ironclad evidence, he will use those connections to bury us." "We have the forger's confession," Thomas pointed out. "We have the documents themselves showing clear signs of forgery. We have the ledger entries. What more do we need? Testimony from Rodrigo Torres would help. If we can prove Whitmore not only forged documents but also poisoned his victims, that makes the case much stronger. Without that, a good lawyer might be able to create reasonable doubt about the poisoning." "Torres fled to Mexico," Thomas said. "We do not have time to track him down. Whitmore's deadline is today. He could move to seize the Osgood property at any moment." Marshal Clayton drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking, "Here is what I can do. I will go to the territorial court this afternoon and petition for an emergency injunction preventing any transfer of the Osgood property pending an investigation into the validity of the debt documents. That should buy us time. Meanwhile, I will begin a formal investigation into Whitmore's business dealings. If we can build a strong enough case, I will arrest him for fraud. The murder charges will have to wait until we have more definitive proof." It was not everything Thomas had hoped for, but it was better than nothing. "How long will the investigation take? Days, possibly weeks. These things cannot be rushed if we want them to hold up in court." Thomas exchanged a glance with Zara. She looked worried but hopeful. "What should we do in the meantime?" she asked. "Stay safe," Clayton said. "If Whitmore realizes we are investigating him, he might take drastic action. Do not be alone with him, and if he approaches you, do not engage. Let the law handle this." They left the marshal's office feeling cautiously optimistic. It was not the immediate victory they had hoped for, but it was progress. The injunction would prevent Whitmore from taking the ranch, at least temporarily, and the investigation would shine light on all of Whitmore's schemes. As they walked back to where they had left their horses, Zara said, "Do you think he will give up now? Whitmore, I mean. Will he realize he has lost and leave us alone?" "Men like Whitmore do not give up easily," Thomas said. "He will fight this, but at least now you have the law on your side." They were untying their horses when 3 men stepped out of the alley beside them. Thomas recognized one of them as a man who had been pointed out to him as working for Whitmore. All 3 carried guns and wore expressions that suggested they knew how to use them. "Miss Osgood," the lead man said, his voice falsely polite, "Mr. Whitmore would like a word with you, right now." "I have nothing to say to Mr. Whitmore," Zara said, her voice steady despite the fear Thomas could see in her eyes. "That was not a request." Thomas stepped between Zara and the men. "The lady said no. I suggest you move along." The lead man's eyes narrowed. You must be the stranger who has been causing problems. Mr. Whitmore wants to talk to you too. You can come peacefully or we can make this difficult." Thomas's hand moved toward his gun, but he was outnumbered and outpositioned. Before he could draw, he felt a barrel pressed against his back. A fourth man had come up behind them while they were distracted by the others. "Do not do anything stupid," the man behind him said. "Just come with us nice and quiet, and nobody needs to get hurt." Thomas considered his options. He could try to fight, but that would likely get Zara hurt or killed. Better to go along for now and look for an opportunity to escape or for help to arrive. He raised his hands slowly and nodded. They were marched through back alleys to a warehouse at the edge of town. Inside, Horace Whitmore was waiting, sitting in a chair like a king holding court. Up close, he was even more imposing than he had seemed through the window. A large man with cold eyes and an air of absolute confidence. "Miss Osgood," he said, his voice dripping with false concern, "I am disappointed in you. After all my generous offers, after all my patience, you had to go and cause trouble. And you," he turned to Thomas, "must be the cowboy from Pecos. I underestimated you, I admit. I did not think a trail hand would have the intelligence or the audacity to break into my office and steal my private documents." "We stole nothing," Thomas said evenly. "We simply gathered evidence of your crimes, evidence that is now in the hands of the U.S. Marshal." Whitmore's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or calculation. "Is that so? How unfortunate. I suppose I will have to deal with Marshal Clayton. He is a stubborn man, but everyone has a price or a weakness. I will find his." "You cannot bribe or threaten your way out of this," Zara said. "Too many people know the truth now. You are finished." "Am I?" Whitmore stood and walked toward them. "You have caused me significant inconvenience, Miss Osgood, cost me time and money, damaged my reputation. That requires consequences. If you harm us, it will only confirm everything we have told the Marshal," Thomas said. "Perhaps, but it will also eliminate the two people who can testify most convincingly against me. Without you, the case becomes much weaker. Sullivan is a drunk and a known forger. His testimony alone will not convince a jury, especially once my lawyers are done discrediting him." Thomas tensed, preparing to fight even though the odds were impossible. But before anyone could move, there was a commotion outside the warehouse. Shouting, the sound of horses, and then the doors burst open. Marshal Clayton strode in with 6 armed deputies, their guns drawn. "Step away from them, Whitmore," Clayton ordered. Whitmore's men reached for their weapons but found themselves staring down the barrels of federal guns. Slowly they raised their hands. "This is a mistake, Marshal," Whitmore said smoothly. "These two broke into my office and stole my property. I was simply detaining them until the proper authorities could arrive." "Save it," Clayton said. "I just finished talking to Frederick Sullivan again, and this time he told me everything, including the fact that you threatened to kill him if he testified. I also received a telegram from the Marshal in Austin. Seems Mrs. Martinez kept some of her husband's financial records, and they do not match the debt documents you produced. We have enough to arrest you for fraud, and I expect we will have enough for murder charges soon too." Thomas watched the emotions play across Whitmore's face. Surprise, anger, and then, finally, a cold calculation. The man was still looking for an angle, still trying to figure out how to escape. "Horace Whitmore," Clayton said formally, "you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit murder. Deputies, take him into custody." As they led Whitmore away in chains, he turned and looked at Zara. "This is not over," he said quietly. "I have friends in high places. I will be out by the end of the week, and then you will pay for this." "I do not think so," Clayton said. "Your friends cannot help you now." The territorial governor himself is watching this case. Too many important people are angry about being made to look foolish by your schemes. You are going to prison, Whitmore, for a very long time." After Whitmore and his men had been taken away, Clayton turned to Thomas and Zara. "You two should have told me you were being threatened. I could have provided protection." "It happened fast," Thomas said. "We came straight from your office to get our horses and they were waiting for us." "Well, you are safe now. Go home, both of you. I will be in touch as the investigation continues, but the immediate danger is over." They rode back to the ranch in silence, both processing everything that had happened. When they arrived, Zara went immediately to check on her mother, and Thomas followed. The older woman was awake, propped up on pillows, and looked slightly better than she had the night before. "Mama," Zara said, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking her mother's hand. "It is over. Whitmore has been arrested. The ranch is safe." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Truly. Truly. Thanks to Thomas, we have proof that Whitmore forged the debt documents. He is going to prison. We do not have to leave our home." Her mother looked at Thomas, who stood in the doorway. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for helping my daughter, for bringing justice for my husband. I do not know how to repay such a debt." "There is no debt," Thomas said. "Your son saved my life once. This is simply returning the favor." Over the following weeks, as winter slowly gave way to early spring, the full scope of Whitmore's crimes became clear. The investigation revealed that he had defrauded at least 7 families over a period of 6 years, always using the same method: slowly poisoning the patriarch, forging debt documents, and using his legal and political connections to claim the properties. The total value of what he had stolen was close to $200,000. Rodrigo Torres was eventually located in Mexico and extradited. Faced with murder charges, he confessed to administering poison under Whitmore's orders, though he claimed he had not known the medicine he delivered was actually toxic. His testimony sealed Whitmore's fate. The former businessman was convicted of fraud, forgery, and 4 counts of murder. He was sentenced to hang. The families Whitmore had defrauded began the process of reclaiming their properties. For the Osgoods, it meant more than just keeping the ranch. The investigation revealed that Whitmore had also embezzled money from the legitimate partnership he had shared with Gerald Osgood. When all accounts were settled, Zara and her mother were actually better off financially than they had been before Gerald's death. Through all of this, Thomas stayed at the ranch, helping Zara manage the property and prepare for spring planting. He told himself he was just seeing the job through, making sure she was truly safe before he returned to Pecos. But as the days turned into weeks, he found it harder and harder to imagine leaving. He and Zara fell into an easy partnership, working side by side during the day and talking long into the evenings by the fire. He learned that she had dreams beyond just preserving her father's legacy. She wanted to expand the ranch, breed better cattle, maybe even start a horse breeding program. She had ideas about water management and sustainable grazing, plans that would have been revolutionary coming from anyone, but seemed especially so coming from a woman in a man's world. "People think I am crazy," she admitted one evening. "A woman trying to run a ranch alone. They say I should sell out, move to town, live like a proper lady." "What do you say?" Thomas asked. "I say they can mind their own business. This ranch is mine, bought with my father's sweat and my mother's tears. No one is taking it from me, and no one is telling me how to run it." He smiled. "Good. Anyone who underestimates you is a fool." She looked at him across the fire, and something in her expression made his heart race. "What about you, Thomas? What do you want?" "I do not know any more," he said honestly. "I thought I knew. I was going to buy land, build my own place, live a quiet life, but now that plan seems empty somehow." Why? He met her eyes. Because none of it includes you. The words hung in the air between them. Zara's breath caught and color rose in her cheeks. Thomas, I know I have no right, he said quickly. You are a woman of property and education, and I am just a cowboy with a few $100s saved. I know I should go back to Pecos and let you get on with your life. But I cannot stop thinking about what it would be like to stay here, to help you build your dreams, to be part of something bigger than just my own small plans. She stood and walked around the fire to where he sat. Do you know what I see when I look at you? She said softly. I see a man who rode through a blizzard to help a stranger, a man who risked his life to get justice for my father, a man who is strong enough to fight when necessary but gentle enough to hold me when I cried. I see the man I want to spend the rest of my life with. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Zara, are you sure? We have only known each other for a few weeks. I have never been more sure of anything. She reached down and took his hands, pulling him to his feet. I love you, Thomas Brennan. I think I have loved you since the moment you showed up at my door, having traveled all that way because of a letter from a desperate stranger. I love you too, he said, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. I have loved you since I saw you standing in that doorway, tall and strong and refusing to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. He pulled her close and kissed her, and it felt like coming home. She kissed him back with a passion that set his blood on fire, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she was smiling. Marry me, he said, the words tumbling out before he could think them through. I know it is too soon. I know I should wait and court you properly, but I cannot imagine being anywhere else or being with anyone else. Marry me, Zara. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Zara's mother, much improved now that the stress had lifted, cried tears of joy throughout the service. Marshal Clayton attended, along with several other people from town who had befriended the Osgoods during their ordeal. It was simple and perfect, exactly what both of them wanted. Thomas moved his few possessions from the boarding house in Pecos to the ranch. He sent a letter to Mr. Henderson explaining that he would not be returning, thanking him for the offer of continued employment, but telling him he had found something better in San Antonio. He also visited the bank and added the money he had saved to the ranch accounts, insisting that it all go toward Zara's breeding program. This is your money, she protested. You saved it for your own dreams. My dreams changed, he said. Now they are our dreams. They threw themselves into the work of running the ranch. Thomas proved to have a natural talent for working with horses, and Zara's breeding program began to take shape. They bought several promising mares and a stallion with excellent bloodlines, and began the long process of building a herd that would eventually be known throughout Texas for quality and temperament. Zara's mother, Helen, lived for another year, long enough to see the ranch prosperous again, long enough to welcome her first grandchild. Thomas and Zara's son was born on a crisp autumn morning, healthy and loud. They named him Samuel, after the friend who had brought them together. Helen held her grandson in her arms and smiled at Thomas. My husband would have liked you, she said. He always said the measure of a man was not in how much he owned, but in what he was willing to do for others. You have proven yourself a good man, Thomas Brennan. I am glad my daughter found you. I am glad she found me too, Thomas said. I am the lucky one in this arrangement. Helen laughed softly. You are both lucky. That is how it should be. She passed away peacefully in her sleep a week later, leaving behind a legacy of love and strength that lived on in her daughter and grandson. Over the next years, Thomas and Zara built something remarkable. The ranch grew and prospered, becoming known not just for its quality horses but for its innovative practices. Zara's ideas about water management and sustainable grazing attracted attention from other ranchers, and she found herself giving talks and writing articles for agricultural journals. Thomas supported her every step of the way, managing the day-to-day operations while she pushed the boundaries of what a ranch could be. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Rose and another son they called James. The house rang with laughter and the chaos of family life. Thomas would sometimes stop in the middle of a task and just look around, marveling at how his life had turned out. He had come to San Antonio with nothing but a sense of obligation and a desire to help a friend's sister. He had found love, family, purpose, and a home. On winter evenings, when the children were in bed and the ranch was quiet, Thomas and Zara would sit by the fire and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes she would tease him about the letter that had brought him south. "What if you had not opened it?" she would say. "What if the mail wagon had not made it through the blizzard?" "Then I would have missed out on everything that matters," he would reply. "But the wagon did make it through, and I did open the letter, and here we are." "Here we are," she would echo, smiling that smile that still made his heart race even after years of marriage. The ranch continued to grow. Samuel, their eldest, showed an early interest in the horses, often following his father around and asking endless questions. Rose was quieter but observant, with her mother's intelligence and her grandmother's grace. James was still young, but already showing signs of being the adventurous one, always getting into mischief and making his parents laugh with his antics. Thomas taught Samuel to ride when the boy was 5, just as his own father had taught him. He showed his son how to read the signs in a horse's behavior, how to approach with calm confidence, how to build trust through patience and consistency. Watching Samuel's face light up when he successfully completed a task filled Thomas with a pride he had never imagined feeling. Zara continued to break barriers. She was invited to join the Regional Cattlemen's Association, the first woman ever granted membership. Some of the older ranchers grumbled about it, but most recognized that her knowledge and innovations had made them all more successful. She attended meetings with Thomas by her side, the 2 of them presenting a united front that commanded respect. 5 years after their wedding, on a warm spring afternoon, Thomas and Zara stood on the porch of their home and looked out over the land they had built together. The pastures were green with new grass, the horses grazed peacefully in the near paddock, and from inside the house came the sounds of their children playing. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had gone differently?" Zara asked, leaning against his shoulder. "If Whitmore had succeeded, if you had not come," sometimes, Thomas admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. We cannot change the past, and I would not want to even if we could. Everything that happened, all the hardships and struggles, they brought us here. They made us who we are." "Samuel would have loved knowing you were happy," she said softly. "He used to write to me about his hopes for the future, about the ranch he wanted to buy someday, the family he wanted to have. He never got those things, but knowing that his friend did, that his sister did, I think it would have made him glad." Thomas pulled her close. "I think about him often, about how he saved my life, about how his sacrifice made all of this possible. I try to live in a way that would make him proud." "You do," Zara said with certainty. "Every single day you honor his memory by being the man he believed you to be." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky with colors of gold and pink. The winter that had brought Thomas to San Antonio felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 6 years. In that time, he had found love, built a family, created a home, and helped forge something that would last for generations. That night, After the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Thomas found himself thinking about the letter that had started everything. It was tucked away in a drawer in their bedroom, carefully preserved. Sometimes he would take it out and reread it, remembering the snow and the cold and the moment he had decided to ride south. Zara had been desperate when she wrote it, alone and afraid, reaching out to a stranger because she had no other options. But that desperation had led to something beautiful. It had brought them together, had created the life they now shared. He thought about all the small moments that had brought them to this point. The male wagon driver who had pushed through the blizzard. The clerk who had remembered details about the Martinez case. Marshal Clayton's willingness to take their evidence seriously. Sullivan's decision to confess. All of these tiny choices and chances had woven together to create their story, and now here they were, building a legacy that would outlast them both. The ranch would pass to their children, and someday to their children's children. The innovations Zara pioneered would change how people managed land in this harsh territory. The love they shared would ripple out through their family, shaping how their children understood marriage and partnership. Thomas had once thought his dreams were small and simple, a piece of land, a quiet life, independence. But Zara had shown him that dreams could be so much bigger. They could include love that challenged and strengthened you. They could include family that filled your days with meaning. They could include work that made a difference beyond yourself. As he climbed into bed beside his wife, she stirred and reached for his hand. "What are you thinking about?" she murmured sleepily. "Just about how lucky I am," he said. "About how one letter changed everything." "That letter did not change anything," she said. "You changed things. You chose to come, chose to help, chose to stay. The letter was just paper and ink. You were the one who made it matter." He kissed her forehead. "We made it matter, together." "Together," she agreed and drifted back to sleep. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. There were hard winters and drought years, times when money was tight and the work seemed endless. But through it all, Thomas and Zara faced everything side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. Samuel grew into a capable young man who shared his father's way with horses and his mother's innovative thinking. By the time he was 15, he was managing significant portions of the ranch operation, earning the respect of the hired hands through his skill and fair treatment. Rose developed a talent for the business side of things, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to maximize profits without compromising quality. James turned out to have a gift for breeding, able to see potential in bloodlines that others missed. Thomas and Zara watched their children grow with pride and wonder. They had given them a foundation of love and hard work, of integrity and innovation. Now, they were beginning to see those values take root and flourish in the next generation. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Zara into town for a rare evening away from the ranch. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant, the same hotel where Thomas had stayed when he first arrived in San Antonio. As they ate, they talked about everything that had happened since that cold February day when he had ridden up to her door. "You have any regrets?" Zara asked. Thomas considered the question seriously. He thought about the life he had imagined in Pecos, the solitary existence working toward ownership of his own small place. He thought about all the quiet evenings he had spent alone, dreaming of something he had not been able to articulate. "Not a single one," he said finally. "This life we have built, it is more than I ever imagined possible. You are more than I ever imagined possible." She smiled, the expression lighting up her face in a way that still made his breath catch. "I feel the same way. Sometimes I think about that letter, about how desperate I was when I wrote it. I was reaching out to a stranger, hoping for a miracle, and I got one, but it was not the miracle I expected. What do you mean? I thought I needed someone to save me from Whitmore, to fix my immediate problem. But what I got was a partner, someone who believed in me and my dreams, someone who made me stronger instead of trying to protect me from everything. You did not just save the ranch, Thomas. You saved me. You saved yourself, he corrected gently. You had already been fighting for a year before I arrived. You had already proven your strength. I just helped you finish what you started. We helped each other, she said. That is what marriage is supposed to be, I think. Not one person saving the other, but both people making each other better. They returned home that night to find all 3 children still awake, waiting up for them. Samuel had apparently convinced his younger siblings that their parents needed a proper anniversary celebration. The dining table was set with their best dishes, and the children had prepared a meal with help from the ranch cook. It was slightly burned in places and oversalted in others, but it was made with love, and that made it perfect. As Thomas looked around the table at his family, at the faces of his wife and children, he felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. This was what he had been searching for all along, even when he had not known what he was searching for. This sense of belonging, of purpose, of being part of something larger than himself. After the children had gone to bed, Thomas and Zara walked out onto the porch, looking up at the stars. The night was clear and cool, with a breeze that carried the scent of growing things. "Thank you," Thomas said suddenly. "For what? For writing that letter, for taking a chance on a stranger, for giving me this life." Zara turned to face him, her hands coming up to cup his face. "Thank you for reading it, for coming all this way, for staying. For loving me exactly as I am, not trying to change me into someone easier or more conventional." He kissed her then, deep and long, pouring into it all the love and gratitude he felt. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "You think Samuel knows?" Zara asked. "Your Samuel, I mean. Do you think somehow he knows that his letter brought us together, that his sister and his friend found happiness because of him?" "I like to think he does," Thomas said. "I like to think he is somewhere smiling, knowing that the sacrifice he made during the war led to something good. That his death was not the end but a beginning for us." They stood together under the stars, 2 people who had been brought together by circumstance and choice, by tragedy and hope, by a winter mail wagon that had carried only one letter through a blizzard. That letter had changed both their lives, had created ripples that would extend far beyond them into the future. The ranch continued to prosper over the following years. Thomas and Zara expanded the horse breeding program, adding new bloodlines and developing a reputation that extended beyond Texas. Buyers came from as far as California and New Mexico to purchase their stock. The cattle operation remained strong and steady, providing reliable income that funded their more ambitious projects. When Samuel turned 18, he asked his father if he could start breeding program of his own, focusing on working horses specifically suited to ranch life. Thomas agreed, giving his son a portion of the operation to manage independently. It was a risk, but it was also a vote of confidence, and Samuel rose to the challenge. Within 3 years, his working horse line was considered some of the finest in the territory. Rose surprised everyone by announcing at 16 that she wanted to study business in the East. It was an unusual aspiration for a rancher's daughter, but Thomas and Zara supported her dream. They sent her to a women's college in Boston, where she excelled. She returned 2 years later with new ideas about financial management and marketing that helped the ranch reach even greater levels of success. James, true to form, took a different path entirely. He wanted to travel to see other ranching operations, to learn different techniques and approaches. At 19, he set off on a journey that took him through Mexico, back through California, and eventually up into Montana. He sent letters home describing everything he saw, and Thomas read them aloud to Zara by the fire, both of them marveling at their son's adventures while missing him terribly. As Thomas approached 50, he began to think about legacy in a more concrete way. He and Zara had built something remarkable, but what would happen to it after they were gone? He wanted to ensure that the ranch stayed in the family, that the innovations and principles they had established would continue. They worked with lawyers to establish a trust that would protect the property and provide clear guidance for succession. They documented all of Zara's breeding techniques and management practices, creating manuals that their children and future generations could reference. They established relationships with agricultural colleges, sharing their knowledge so that others could benefit from what they had learned. On a summer evening when Thomas was 52, he and Zara took a long ride across the ranch property, something they tried to do at least once a week. They rode in comfortable silence, following familiar trails through land they knew as well as they knew each other. "You ever think about Pecos?" Zara asked. "About the life you would have had if you had stayed there." "Sometimes," Thomas admitted, "but it feels like thinking about someone else's life now. That man who worked in the general store, who saved his pennies and dreamed small dreams, he is so far from who I am now that I barely recognize him." "I recognize him," Zara said. "He is still there in you. The careful planning, the steady determination, the willingness to work hard for what you want. Those parts did not change. They just got directed toward bigger things." "Bigger things," Thomas echoed. "Is that what this is?" "This is everything," she said simply. "This ranch, our family, the life we have built. It is everything that matters." They stopped at the highest point on the property, where they could see for miles in every direction. The land rolled away from them in shades of green and gold, dotted with cattle and horses, marked by fences and windmills and the buildings that housed their workers. In the distance, they could see the main house, smoke rising from its chimney. "I want you to know something," Thomas said. "These years with you have been the happiest of my life, not because everything was easy, but because everything mattered. Every morning I woke up knowing I was doing something important, building something that would last, and I got to do it with you beside me." Tears shimmered in Zara's eyes. "Why does this sound like goodbye?" "It is not goodbye. It is just gratitude. I am getting older and I find myself wanting to say things I have always assumed you knew. I love you, Zara. More now than I did when we married, more than I did yesterday, more than I thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me everything I did not know I needed, not just saving the ranch, but showing me what partnership could be. Believing in my dreams even when others thought I was crazy. Standing beside me as an equal, not trying to lead or protect me, but walking the path with me." They rode back to the house as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. As they dismounted and cared for their horses together, moving through the familiar routine with the ease of long practice, Thomas felt a deep sense of peace. That night, their children came to dinner with their families. Samuel had married a neighboring rancher's daughter, and they had 2 young children of their own. Rose had found love with a businessman from San Antonio, a man who appreciated her intelligence and ambition. James had recently returned from his travels with a new bride, a woman he had met in California who shared his adventurous spirit. The house was full of noise and laughter, grandchildren running through the halls, multiple conversations happening at once. Thomas sat at the head of the table with Zara beside him, and looked around at everyone they had created together. This was legacy in its truest form, not just property and money, but people who carried forward their values and dreams. After dinner, when the younger children had been put to bed and the adults lingered over coffee, Samuel raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast," he said, "to my parents who built something extraordinary out of nothing but determination and love. Everything we have, everything we are, we owe to you." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the sentiment. Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your mother deserves most of the credit," he managed to say. "I just tried to keep up with her." "You did more than keep up," Zara said, squeezing his hand. "You pushed me to dream bigger, to take risks I would not have taken alone. We built this together." "Together," Thomas agreed, and the word seemed to encapsulate everything about their life. The years continued to turn, bringing more changes and challenges. Thomas's hair went fully gray, and his joints started to ache in cold weather. Zara developed a slight limp from an old injury but refused to slow down. They gradually handed over more responsibilities to their children, trusting them to carry forward what had been started. On a winter morning, 23 years after Thomas had first ridden up to the ranch, he woke to find snow falling outside the window. It was rare for San Antonio to get snow, but it happened occasionally, usually just a light dusting that melted by afternoon. Thomas lay in bed watching the flakes drift past the window, and his mind went back to that other winter, the blizzard that had brought him here. He thought about the male wagon driver who had pushed through impossible conditions carrying a single letter. He thought about opening that letter in the cold general store, about the decision to ride south, about everything that had followed. "What are you thinking about?" Zara asked, stirring beside him. "The day I got your letter. The snow reminds me." She smiled and snuggled closer. "Best letter I ever wrote. Best letter I ever received." They lay together watching the snow, both thinking about the unlikely series of events that had brought them here. A young soldier dying of fever far from home. A sister desperately reaching out to her brother's friend. A cowboy deciding to honor an old debt. All of these small moments connecting and building into something neither of them could have anticipated. "Do you think we would have found each other anyway?" Zara asked. "If I had not written that letter, if Samuel had not talked about you, do you think our paths would have crossed somehow?" "I do not know," Thomas said honestly. "I like to think that some things are meant to be, that we were always going to end up here together. But I also know that life is full of chances and choices, and we were lucky that ours aligned." "Lucky," she repeated. "Yes, I think that is right. We were lucky, and we were smart enough to recognize that luck and hold on to it." Later that day, as the snow continued to fall, the grandchildren convinced Thomas to come outside and play. He built snowmen with them, had snowball fights, and marveled at their delight in something so simple. When he finally came back inside, cold and tired but happy, Zara met him with hot coffee and a warm blanket. "You are going to hurt tomorrow," she said, amused. "Probably," he agreed. "But it was worth it. Did you see their faces?" "I did. You are a wonderful grandfather, Thomas Brennan." "I am trying to be. I want them to have good memories of me like I have of my grandfather. I want them to know they are loved and valued." "They know," she assured him. "How could they not? You show them every day." As winter slowly gave way to spring again, Thomas found himself feeling reflective. He was 65 now, an age he had not been certain he would reach given the hard life he had lived before finding the ranch. But here he was, still strong enough to work a full day, still sharp enough to make good decisions, still deeply in love with his wife. One afternoon, he was working in the stable when Samuel came to find him. His son, now a man of 40 with gray starting to show in his own hair, had a serious expression. "Father, I need to talk to you about something." Thomas set down the bridle he had been mending. "What is it?" "I have been approached by a consortium of ranchers who want to form a cooperative. They want our family to be part of the leadership because of Mother's reputation and the innovations we have pioneered. It is a big commitment, would require time and resources. I wanted to get your thoughts before making a decision." Thomas considered the question carefully. "What does your mother think?" "She is intrigued but cautious. She wants to make sure we do not overextend ourselves. Your mother is wise. Let me ask you this, Samuel. Will joining this cooperative help other ranchers? Will it spread good practices and improve the industry as a whole?" "Yes, I think it would." "Then I think you should do it. Your mother and I have never been content to just take care of ourselves. We have always believed that we have a responsibility to share what we have learned, to help others succeed. If this cooperative can do that on a larger scale, then it is worth the investment." Samuel smiled. "I thought you would say that. Mother said the same thing, almost word for word. You two really do think alike." "After 40 years together, I should hope so." His son hesitated, then said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "How did you know? When you first met Mother, when you barely knew her, how did you know she was the one you wanted to spend your life with?" Thomas thought back to that first day, to Zara standing in the doorway looking tired and strong and beautiful. "I did not know right away," he said honestly, "but I knew there was something special about her. The way she held herself, the determination in her eyes, the way she refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. I knew I wanted to know her better, wanted to be the kind of man who deserved someone like her." The love came later, grew out of working together and talking together and facing challenges together. But that initial spark of recognition, of knowing this person mattered, that was there from the beginning. "I felt that way when I met Clara," Samuel said. "Like I had been searching for something without knowing what it was, and suddenly there it was." Then hold on to that feeling. Nurture it. Love is not just an emotion, son. It is a choice you make every day. A choice to put someone else's needs alongside your own, to build something together that neither of you could build alone. Your mother taught me that." Samuel nodded slowly. "Thank you. For everything you have taught me, for the example you and Mother have set. I know I do not say it often enough, but I am grateful. You do not need to say it. I see it in how you live your life, in how you treat your wife and children, in the decisions you make. That is thanks enough." That evening, Thomas told Zara about the conversation. She listened with her head on his shoulder, both of them sitting on the porch swing they had installed years ago. "He is a good man," she said. "They all are. We did well with our children." "You did well," Thomas corrected. "You are the one who taught them to think critically, to question conventions, to believe they could make a difference. And you taught them integrity, hard work, and loyalty. We both contributed. That is how parenting works when you do it right." They sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently on the swing. The ranch was quiet in the evening light, peaceful and prosperous. Everything they had fought for, everything they had built, spread out before them. "You ever think about writing it all down?" Zara asked. "Our story, I mean. How we met, how we built all this, for the grandchildren so they know where they came from." "I have thought about it," Thomas admitted, "but I would not know where to start." "Start with the winter, with the blizzard and the letter. Start with the moment everything changed." "The winter mail wagon carried only your letter," Thomas said slowly, testing how the words sounded. "I read it and rode out to find you." "That is perfect," Zara said. "That is exactly where to start." So Thomas began to write. He worked on it in the evenings, filling pages with his careful handwriting, telling the story of how they had met and fallen in love and built a life together. He wrote about Samuel, the friend whose death had led to something beautiful. He wrote about Whitmore and the fight for justice. He wrote about building the ranch, raising children, creating something that would outlast them both. It took him nearly 2 years to finish, working in spare moments between the demands of ranch life. When he was done, he had a manuscript of over 100 pages, a complete account of their journey together. He gave it to Zara to read first, nervous about what she would think. She read it over the course of a week, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, sometimes just sitting quietly with the pages in her hands. When she finished, she found Thomas in the stable and threw her arms around him. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is us, exactly as we were and are. Thank you for writing it. I wanted to make sure people knew," he said. "Not just our descendants, but anyone who reads it. I wanted them to know that courage and love and partnership can overcome almost anything. That one letter, one decision to help someone in need, can change everything." They had copies made of the manuscript and gave them to their children and grandchildren. They also donated a copy to the territorial library, thinking that perhaps someday someone else might read it and find inspiration or hope in their story. Thomas was 70 when his health finally began to fail. It was nothing dramatic, just a gradual slowing down, a deepening fatigue that no amount of rest seemed to cure. The doctor told him his heart was wearing out, that after a lifetime of hard work and hard living, his body was simply tired. "How long?" Thomas asked bluntly. "Could be months, could be a year. Hard to say with these things, but you should get your affairs in order." Thomas told Zara that evening, holding her as she cried. "I am not ready to lose you," she said. "I know that is selfish. I know everyone dies eventually, but I am not ready." "I am not ready to go either," he said. "But we do not always get to choose these things. What we can choose is how we spend the time we have left." They chose to spend it together, doing the things they had always loved. They rode across the ranch every day the weather permitted. They sat on the porch in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. They gathered their children and grandchildren around them, telling stories and sharing wisdom and simply being together. Thomas made sure all his affairs were in order. The ranch would pass to his children with clear instructions about how it should be managed. He had written letters to each of his grandchildren, telling them how much they meant to him and what he hoped for their futures. He had made peace with everyone he needed to make peace with. On a spring morning, 42 years after he had first ridden up to the ranch in response to a desperate letter, Thomas woke feeling weaker than usual. He knew somehow that this was the day, that his body had finally reached the end of what it could endure. Zara knew it too. She helped him dress, and then they went out to the porch, wrapped in blankets despite the warm morning air. She sat beside him holding his hand, both of them looking out at the land they had built together. "I am not afraid," Thomas said. "I have lived a good life, better than I ever dreamed possible. The only thing I regret is leaving you." "You are not leaving me," Zara said fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "You will always be with me. In everything we built, in our children and grandchildren, in every sunrise over this ranch. You will always be here. Take care of yourself," he said. "Do not work too hard. Let the children help you, and know that loving you was the best thing I ever did with my life." "Loving you was my greatest joy," she said. "You made me better than I would have been alone. You gave me courage and partnership and a love I never thought to find. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for reading my letter, for coming to help, for staying. Thank you for everything." He squeezed her hand. "The winter mail wagon carried only your letter," he whispered. "Best delivery I ever received." She was still holding his hand when he slipped away, his last sight the land he loved and the woman who had made his life meaningful. It was a peaceful ending to a life well lived. Zara lived for 6 more years after Thomas's death. She continued to run the ranch with her children's help, though she never quite regained the energy and fire that had characterized her earlier years. She took comfort in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in seeing the legacy she and Thomas had built continuing into the future. She often sat on the porch where she and Thomas had spent so many evenings together, and people would sometimes find her talking to him as if he were still there. Maybe, in some way, he was. The ranch bore his mark in every fence post and every carefully selected breeding line. His values lived on in how his children ran the operation and raised their own families. On a winter morning, with snow falling gently outside her window, Zara passed away in her sleep. Her children found her lying peacefully in bed, a slight smile on her face, holding the letter she had written to Thomas all those years ago. She had kept it all this time, that desperate plea that had changed both their lives. They buried her next to Thomas on the hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone that read, Zara Osgood Brennan, beloved wife, mother, and pioneer. Thomas's stone beside it read, Thomas Brennan, beloved husband, father, and friend. Together even in death, looking out over what they had created together. Their descendants continued to run the ranch for generations. The breeding program they started became famous throughout the West. The innovations Zara pioneered became standard practice across the territory and beyond. And their story, preserved in Thomas's manuscript and passed down through family tales, became a reminder that love and courage could overcome any obstacle. The winter mail wagon that had carried Zara's letter through the blizzard was long since gone, rotted away or burned for firewood. But the results of that delivery lived on, rippling out through time and space, affecting people who would never know the names Thomas Brennan and Zara Osgood. Their ranch employed dozens of people over the years, giving them honest work and fair wages. The horses they bred pulled wagons, carried cowboys, and helped build the West. The techniques they developed helped other ranchers succeed, feeding families and building communities. And somewhere, perhaps, Samuel Osgood smiled knowing that his last request had led to something beautiful, that his sister had found love and safety, that his friend had found purpose and joy, that from tragedy and desperation had grown something strong enough to weather storms and last for generations. The letter that started it all was eventually donated to a museum, carefully preserved behind glass. Visitors would read it and wonder about the woman who had written it and the man who had answered her call. Some saw it as a romance, others as a story of justice and courage. But everyone who read it came away with the same feeling of hope, the same belief that individual actions mattered, that reaching out in desperate times could lead to unexpected miracles. And every winter, when snow fell on San Antonio, people on the ranch would remember Thomas and Zara. They would tell the story to new generations, keeping alive the memory of two people who had built something lasting out of nothing but determination, love, and a single letter carried through a blizzard by a mail wagon that had no other deliveries to make that day.